The Belgian detective Hercule Poirot does not believe in coincidence. This philosophical principle has guided him through 30 years of investigation, through the darkest corridors of the human heart, through crimes of passion and crimes of calculation. And so, when the letter arrived cream-colored, sealed with wax the color of dried blood delivered by a courier who would not explain its origin, Poirot's perfectly manicured fingers trembled only slightly as he broke the seal. The letter was brief, an invitation, really, or perhaps a summons. It requested his presence at Whitmore Manor, deep in the Yorkshire moors, by the 30th of December. A private matter, a delicate matter, unsigned, save for the initials E.W. The handwriting belonged to someone educated, someone accustomed to authority. Yet the pressure of the pen suggested anxiety, fear. Even Poirot had accepted without hesitation. Now, as his motorcar wound through the snow-choked roads, the detective sat with his hands folded precisely in his lap, his little mustache, that magnificent, iconic mustache, perfectly waxed and groomed despite the journey. His protege, the faithful Captain Hastings, sat beside him, peering anxiously through the frosted windows. Dreadful weather, Hastings muttered. "I say, Poirot, do you think we'll find shelter before nightfall?" "The shelter awaits us," Poirot replied, his voice carrying the lilting accent of his native Brugs. "Whitmore Manor, it exists, therefore we shall reach it. The little gray cells do not concern themselves with pessimism, mon ami. Logic dictates that if a letter was sent, then the sender expects us to arrive." Yet even as he spoke, Poirot gazed out at the landscape transformed into something from a fever dream. The moors stretched away in every direction, white and undulating, broken only by skeletal trees that clawed at a sky the color of lead. The wind howled, not the ordinary wind of winter, but something more primal, more aggressive. It rattled the motorcar's windows and seemed to carry within it the voices of the damned. By 4 o'clock, the manor emerged from the snow like a ship breaking through fog. Whitmore Manor was Victorian Gothic at its most severe, 3 stories of gray stone, turrets at each corner like accusing fingers pointed at heaven, windows that seemed to stare rather than observe. Ivy clung to its walls in serpentine patterns. Chimney smoke rose straight up in the windless pocket around the building, creating a strange halo effect that struck Hastings as distinctly ominous. "Good Lord," he whispered. The motor drew to a halt before the entrance, before the driver could exit. The manor's great oak door swung open with theatrical precision. A tall woman stood silhouetted against the warm light of the interior. Even from within the motorcar, her silhouette communicated hauteur, breeding, and something else, a nervous tension that manifested in the way she gripped the doorframe. This, Poirot knew at once, was Lady Evangeline Whitmore, E.W., the woman who had summoned him. A servant rushed to collect their luggage as Poirot and Hastings emerged. The cold was shocking, not merely cold, but a physical assault. The snow crunched beneath their shoes like breaking bone. The wind cut through their winter coats as if through gauze. For a moment, Poirot allowed himself to experience the sensation, to let the atmosphere of this place imprint itself upon his consciousness. The little gray cells, he knew, would require this sensory foundation. "Mr. Poirot," Lady Evangeline said, extending a gloved hand. She was perhaps 50, with the kind of beauty that wealth and privilege had preserved: an amber-pale skin, sharp cheekbones, eyes a remarkable shade of gray that seemed to see everything and trust nothing. "You came, madam," Poirot replied, bending slightly to kiss the back of her hand, a continental gesture that prompted something between gratitude and alarm to cross her features. "I do not receive letters. I receive summonses. And when one is summoned by such urgency masked beneath such civility, Hercule Poirot attends." "You noticed," Lady Evangeline said quietly. "It was not a question. I notice all things, madam. It is my curse and my profession." The initials unsigned, yet the stationery monogrammed. "You did not wish to explicitly invite me, yet you felt compelled to do so. Someone has made demands upon your character, non? Someone has pressured you into summoning me to this place of winter desolation." For the briefest moment, Lady Evangeline's composure fractured. Her eyes glistened, but she recovered herself with admirable speed, her mouth tightening into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Come inside," she said. "The storm grows worse, and there are people who wish to meet you." As they crossed the threshold, Poirot cast one final glance at the more beyond. The snow was falling in great, silent curtains now. The world beyond Whitmore Manor was becoming less real by the moment, not quite erased, but definitely receding, fading, becoming as insubstantial as memory. The door closed behind them with a soft but definitive click. The interior of the manor was all they had feared. High ceilings soared away into shadow. A grand staircase spiraled upward, its burgundy carpet worn in the center where footsteps had passed for generations. Portraits lined the walls, stern-faced ancestors who seemed to follow the visitors. With their painted eyes, candles in iron sconces provided pools of flickering yellow light that made the shadows between them seem deeper, more purposeful. The air smelled of wood smoke, old money, and something else beneath those scents, something vaguely medicinal and faintly corrupt. "You must be exhausted," Lady Evangeline said, though her words suggested she cared nothing for their comfort. "Your rooms are prepared on the second floor. We gather for dinner at 8. I trust that will allow sufficient time for you to rest and prepare." Poirot consulted the antique pocket watch that hung from his waistcoat by a golden chain. "Adequate, madam, though I confess I would prefer to meet your household now, to observe them in their natural state, before they have time to arrange their expressions and edit their truths." Something flickered in Lady Evangeline's eyes. Was it fear or satisfaction? "Very well," she said. "The sitting room. I shall assemble everyone immediately." As she swept away, Hastings leaned toward Poirot and whispered urgently, "This feels wrong, my dear fellow. Absolutely wrong. Why in God's name would she summon us if she wasn't prepared for your methods?" Poirot adjusted his tie with meticulous care, his fingers lingering on the fabric as if drawing comfort from its precise placement. "Ah, mon ami," he said softly, "that is precisely the question that troubles the little gray cells. Why, indeed, unless," he trailed off, his eyes fixed on the staircase that descended into shadow, "unless someone within this manor has already decided that murder is preferable to truth. And Madame Evangeline hopes that perhaps, just perhaps, Hercule Poirot might arrive in time to stop it." The wind howled outside, and somewhere in the manor's upper reaches, a door slammed shut. The sitting room was everything the entrance hall had promised and feared. An enormous fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting writhing shadows that made it difficult to judge whether one was truly seeing what was before one's eyes or merely the ghost of what might be. Two burgundy settees faced each other across a low table of mahogany. High-backed chairs clustered in conversational groupings. Oil paintings of hunting scenes adorned the walls. Red-jacketed men on black horses pursued animals frozen in moments of terror that no canvas could capture. A crystal decanter of brandy sat on the sideboard, surrounded by glasses that reflected the firelight like liquid amber. They emerged into the sitting room, one by one, as if obeying some internal summons that had no external source. Lady Evangeline performed the introductions with the precision of a ringmaster, introducing acts at a circus. First came Harold Whitmore, her brother. He was perhaps 10 years younger than his sister, with the same sharp features but without the steel that animated hers. His face suggested breeding, without substance, a drawing of a man rather than the man himself. His hands were soft, unaccustomed to labor. He smiled often, but the smile never touched his eyes, which moved constantly round the room as if seeking exits. He wore a signet ring on his left hand, tapping it obsessively against his thigh. "Harold manages the estate," Lady Evangeline explained, though her tone suggested she expected this fact to be both believed and questioned simultaneously. Next arrived Dr. Melville. Here was a man whose profession had marked him as surely as a brand. He was perhaps 60, with gray hair swept back from a high forehead, and the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most intelligent person in any room. His eyes held that particular combination of compassion and detachment that comes only from years spent managing human suffering. He carried a leather medical bag, which he set carefully beside his chair. "The doctor resides in the village," Lady Evangeline said. "He has been good enough to remain here during the storm to ensure our safety." "How very considerate," Poirot murmured, though his eyes suggested that consideration was precisely what he doubted. Mr. James Darrington entered next, and even from across the room, Poirot could smell the expensive cologne that announced his rival French. Of course, and impeccably applied. Darrington was a man of perhaps 40, with the sleek appearance of someone who had never doubted his own consequence. His suit was fashionable, his jewelry tasteful but evident. He possessed the kind of handsomeness that comes from good breeding, good eating, and the absolute confidence that one belongs everywhere. He moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, though his eyes were those of a predator assessing potential prey. Mr. Darrington, Lady Evangeline said, is a business associate of my husband's. He arrived yesterday to discuss certain financial matters. Her husband, the first mention of Sir Reginald Whitmore. Then came Miss Charlotte Ashford, the secretary. She was a woman of perhaps 35, plain in the manner of many women who have learned that plainness offers a particular type of power. She wore a gray dress of severe cut and had arranged her dark hair in an unflattering bun. But her eyes were sharp, watchful, missing nothing. She carried a leather notebook, which she held to her chest like a shield. Miss Ashford manages my correspondence and appointments, Lady Evangeline explained. She has been with us for 7 years. Finally came Mrs. Eleanor Good, the housekeeper. She was perhaps 60, built solidly on a frame that suggested she had carried heavy things throughout her life. Her face was the kind that had earned its lines through genuine feeling grief, and joy both had marked her. She wore the traditional housekeeper's black dress with a white apron, and her hands were raw from the waters in which she had washed countless dishes. But it was her eyes that held Poirot's attention. Most eyes that suggested she saw more than a servant should be. Permitted to see double quotes Mrs. Good has been with the Whitmore family since Sir Reginald inherited the estate, Lady Evangeline said. She's invaluable to the running of the household. 6 people, then, in this room on the edge of the world, trapped by weather and circumstance. Poirot turned slowly, letting his eyes pass over each face, observing the tensions that crackled between them like electricity. I am grateful for this assembly, he said, his voice carrying the peculiar musicality of his accent. You must understand, it is not often that Hercule Poirot is summoned to a place in advance of catastrophe. Usually, I arrive after the fait accompli, after the deed is done, after the blood has soaked into the carpets, after the truth has begun its slow dance of concealment. But today, this is different, non. Today, I arrive to prevent rather than to investigate. This suggests something most intriguing about the situation that has prompted Madame Evangeline to contact me. He paused, allowing his words to settle like snow upon the room. I am curious, he continued. What danger, precisely, necessitated my presence? Is it a threat to the household? A crime that has already occurred but remains unreported? Or is it something more delicate, a knowledge of something that might occur? A prediction based upon history or character? No one spoke. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the wind's assault against the windows. Harold's fingers tapped more rapidly against his thigh. Mr. Darrington reached for the brandy bottle without permission and poured himself a glass. Miss Ashford's knuckles whitened as she gripped her notebook. Mrs. Good's face remained impassive, but her jaw tightened. It was Dr. Melville who finally spoke. Surely, Mr. Poirot, these questions might wait until after dinner and rest. The lady has had a terrible strain. I do not speak from unkindness, Doctor, Poirot interrupted, but I speak from experience. The first hours of an investigation are the most revealing. Exhaustion has not yet had time to fortify the walls of deception. Grief, if it exists, has not been rehearsed. Fear remains fresh and raw. It bleeds through. And the first, Hercule Poirot, I am a physician of sorts, not of the body, but of the truth. And the truth, it has a scent. One learns to follow it, as a bloodhound follows the scent of a fugitive. There's no immediate danger, Lady Evangeline said suddenly. The words came out too quickly, too sharp. I simply thought, that is to say, I believed. She stopped, composed herself, and began again. My husband has been behaving strangely, erratically. I feared that his mental state might deteriorate to the point of violence, to myself or to others. I thought that perhaps your presence, your reputation, might provide some steadying influence, might convince him that he was being observed, monitored, and therefore might encourage restraint. Poirot tilted his head. considering her words as one might consider a chess move made by an opponent of questionable skill. "And where is Sir Reginald now?" he inquired gently. "In his study," Harold said. "He takes dinner alone, you see." "A private arrangement. Since when?" Poirot asked. "Since approximately 3 weeks ago," Miss Ashford answered, consulting her notebook. "I maintain precise records of household arrangements." "Ah," Poirot said. 3 weeks. This is significant, I think. Something occurred 3 weeks ago that changed your husband's patterns. A letter, perhaps? A visitor? A piece of information received?" "I cannot speak to the particulars," Lady Evangeline said. "Sir Reginald is a man who values his privacy." "I would not presume to." "Of course not," Poirot said softly. "And yet his erratic behavior extends to all within this household, I observe. Each of you carries some mark of tension, some wound of uncertainty. Harold, your fingers, they tap a rhythm of nervousness, a man unaccustomed to anxiety learning to carry it like a new coat. Mr. Darrington, your collar is slightly askew, and you have adjusted it for times since entering this room, a sign of a man not comfortable within his own skin. Dr. Melville, you hold yourself with the posture of someone prepared to flee or to intervene in violence. Miss Ashford, you grip that notebook as if it were evidence in a trial you believe is coming. And Mrs. Good, Mrs. Good's eyes suggest knowledge. Knowledge of what, I wonder?" The housekeeper's face did not change, but something shifted in the room. A door that had been merely closed now slammed definitively shut. "I should retire to prepare for dinner," Lady Evangeline said, rising. "Hastings, Poirot, please. The household must begin the evening's preparations." As the room emptied, people sliding out like shadows or pressing toward the door. With unseemly haste, Poirot remained by the fire, his hands folded before him. Hastings joined him, his face troubled. "She's lying," Hastings whispered. "About the reason she summoned you, I mean. That business about her husband's erratic behavior, it doesn't ring true." "None," Poirot agreed. "It rings like a poorly forged bell. It has the shape of truth, but not the authentic sound. Sir Reginald is not mad, but someone within this household believes that he should be believed to be mad. Or perhaps, and this is the notion that troubles the little gray cells most acutely, perhaps Sir Reginald is not simply erratic, but dangerously aware of something. Something that threatens the arrangement of comfortable lies that hold this household together." They stood in silence, watching the flames. "What do you propose?" Hastings asked. Poirot smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I propose that we have dinner, mon ami, and I propose that we observe most carefully how each member of this household interacts with Sir Reginald, should he choose to join us. For people, they betray themselves most thoroughly in the presence of those who hold power over them. And power, it is the greatest of all secrets." The dinner bell rang somewhere distant in the manor, its tone somehow suggestive of finality. Neither man moved immediately. Outside, the wind screamed against the windows like something alive, something desperate to break through and devour the light within. By the time they rose to go downstairs, it had begun to snow with renewed intensity. By the time the household gathered for dinner, the world beyond Whitmore Manor had effectively ceased to exist, and somewhere in his study, a man named Sir Reginald Whitmore sat alone, his face illuminated by candlelight, his eyes fixed upon a letter that had not yet been shown to anyone. The dinner itself was a masterpiece of tense civility. The dining room stretched away in both directions from its center, the table set with silver that caught the candlelight and reflected it like trapped stars. Sir Reginald sat at the head, a man of perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair, a face carved from granite, and eyes that seemed to look not at people but through them towards something infinitely distant and infinitely troubling. He spoke little. He drank much. His fingers, Poirot noted, were stained with ink on the right hand, but conspicuously clean on the left, suggesting either a recent change in his writing habits or perhaps an injury that had forced a different arrangement. The conversation, such as it was, circulated around topics of profound unimportance: the weather, the state of the roads, a local scandal involving the vicar and the vicar's wife's cousin. Lady Evangeline directed the talk with the precision of a conductor orchestrating in symphony. Yet despite her efforts, discord persisted. Harold ate mechanically, his eyes never meeting anyone else's. Dr. Melville engaged Darrington in discussion of investments, though their voices suggested they were negotiating the terms of something far more significant than stocks and bonds. Miss Ashford observed in silence, her notebook absent from the table but somehow still present in its absence, as if the space it would have occupied was more real than the wood of the table itself, when Sir Reginald suddenly rose to leave. Approximately midway through the main course, no one remarked upon it. No one, in fact, seemed surprised. This was routine then. This was the new arrangement that had been accepted by all within this house. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice like gravel being crushed beneath a heavy wheel, "if you will excuse me, duty's call." He departed, and the conversation, which had been stilted, became somehow more awkward in his absence. How strange that one man's withdrawal should make social interaction more difficult rather than less. Dinner concluded at approximately 10 o'clock. Lady Evangeline suggested an early retirement, given the weariness that travel induced and the exhaustion that the day had created. Few objected. Hastings in particular seemed relieved at the prospect of escaping the charged atmosphere of the manor. Poirot, however, requested to examine the library. The book collection, he explained to his hostess, was a peculiar passion of his. To understand a household, one must understand its aesthetic choices, and aesthetics were revealed nowhere more clearly than in a man's library. Lady Evangeline looked as though she might refuse, but something in Poirot's expression, some immovable quality, convinced her that refusal would prove more troublesome than permission. She provided him with a key and a candle and directed him toward the east wing. The library, when he found it, was everything and nothing that he expected. It was vaster room 2 stories tall, with a gallery running around its circumference and books lining every available surface. But the collection was oddly disorganized. Ancient first editions sat beside contemporary paperbacks. Books in French rested against volumes in German and English. Philosophy crowded against crime novels. Medical texts nested against works of poetry. The organization suggested either a man of remarkably eclectic taste or a man who had not arranged the books himself, or both. Poirot moved through the stacks by candlelight, allowing his fingers to trail along the spines, reading titles that suggested Sir Reginald's interests ranged from Spinoza to the detective fiction of Arthur Conan Doyle. A curious collection. A collection that suggested a man of intelligence, certainly, but also a man troubled by deep questions of philosophy and morality. He was examining a shelf dedicated entirely to works on chemistry and medicine when he heard the scream. It came from somewhere on the upper floors, a sound so primal, so absolute in its expression of horror, that it seemed to strip away all the civilized pretense that Whitmore Manor had accumulated over its centuries. The scream was followed by shouts, by the sound of running feet, by the chaos of a household suddenly thrust out of its careful arrangements into something raw and real. Poirot extinguished his candle and stood in darkness for precisely 3 seconds. Then, moving with surprising speed for a man of his years, he made his way toward the sounds of distress. The servants' staircase took him quickly upward. The main corridor on the 2nd floor was already crowded. Candles and oil lamps had been lit hastily, casting dancing shadows across faces white with shock. Mrs. Good stood in the doorway of what Poirot recognized as the West Wing's main bedroom, her mouth open in an expression of such profound distress that she might have been screaming still, though no sound emerged. "What has occurred?" Poirot demanded, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. It was Dr. Melville who answered, his professional composure providing a thin veneer over his underlying horror. "The doctor believes we must not enter the room, that the scene is delicate." "The scene," Poirot repeated, his eyes narrowing. "You have not entered, yet you know enough to warn against it. Interesting. The doctor diagnoses the interior of a closed room from its exterior. A curious skill. There's blood on the threshold," Melville said quietly. "I observed it as the housekeeper opened the door. It is extensive." Poirot pushed past him into the room. The bedroom was lit by a single oil lamp. Its flame turned low. The furniture was heavy, Victorian, imposing. The wallpaper showed a pattern of roses and thorns. And there, in the center of the carpet, lay the body of Sir Reginald Whitmore. But it was not simply Sir Reginald Whitmore. It was what remained after something terrible had been removed. The body lay face down, still clothed in the evening wear it had worn to dinner. But where the head should have been was simply absence. The neck terminated in a ragged wound, a wound that had bled profusely across the burgundy carpet, the bleeding mixing with the carpet's existing color, until blood and wool became nearly indistinguishable. The head was simply gone, severed, removed, absent. Poirot felt his breath catch. In a career spanning decades, in a life spent examining human cruelty in all its manifestations, he had never encountered a crime scene quite so deliberate in its violation. This was not the work of a frenzied killer. This was not passion. This was calculation. This was message. He turned slowly, allowing his eyes to pass over the room. The air smelled of blood, of course, but also of something else, something vaguely chemical, vaguely reminiscent of the library shelf he had been examining mere minutes before. "No one enters this room," he said quietly. His voice was so soft that everyone on the threshold instinctively leaned forward to hear. "No one touches anything. The body remains exactly as it has been discovered. The head, the absence of the head is evidence. We do not know yet what it tells us, but tell us it does." He turned to face the assembled household. Lady Evangeline stood near the back, her face a mask of controlled disbelief. Harold's hand covered his mouth, and tears ran freely down his face. Were they tears of grief or something else? Mr. Darrington's face was utterly without color, his usual urbanity stripped away like skin from a corpse. Miss Ashford had fainted dead away, and it was Dr. Melville who held her upright. Mrs. Good had sunk onto a chair in the hallway, her body folded in upon itself like a puppet with its strings severed. "We gather now in the sitting room," Poirot announced. "All of us. We do not separate. We do not communicate with each other beyond what is said in the presence of all. The murderer has shown their hand. The hand that committed this act of violence is present in this household. And Hercule Poirot, he does not believe in allowing a killer to walk freely among those they have marked, the police." Hastings stammered. He had appeared somewhere during the chaos, his face pale, but his bearing military. "Surely we must summon the police?" "The magistrate?" Poirot turned to him, and in the candlelight, his eyes seemed to age decades in an instant. "We shall attempt," he said quietly. "But the storm, Captain, the storm has intensified. It gathers beyond these walls like an army preparing for siege. I do not believe the roads remain passable. I do not believe that anyone who ventures outside into that tempest will return. And if my instincts are correct, and they are invariably correct, we are quite alone in this manner. Completely, utterly, and absolutely alone." He looked once more at the body, at the terrible absence where a head should have been. "The killer is among us," he said, "and they have demonstrated a precision, an intention, that suggests this act is not the culmination of their violence, but merely its commencement." The lights seemed to dim, or perhaps it was simply that the room itself had begun to understand what it contained, and understanding had begun to die. The sitting room, where they had gathered merely hours before, had transformed into something between a prison and a waiting room for judgment. The fire had burned down to embers, casting insufficient light. Candles provided pools of illumination that seemed only to deepen the shadows beyond. The storm had intensified beyond anything that any of them had believed possible. The wind did not howl anymore. It had evolved beyond such a primal sound. It had become something almost sentient, almost conscious, an assault that seemed personal and deliberate. "We must attempt the telephone," Dr. Melville insisted. "Surely there is a telephone?" "There is," Poirot said. He had appropriated the high-backed chair that faced the fireplace, positioning himself like a judge upon a bench. "I observed it in the hall, an instrument of recent vintage, and I have already attempted its use. The line is dead. Whether this is due to the storm or to something else more deliberate, I cannot yet determine. But the result is identical. We are isolated. The motor cars," Harold suggested desperately. "We could use the motor cars." "Surely the roads," Poirot said gently, "are no longer roads. They have become abstractions. I have observed through the windows. The snow falls in walls. The visibility is perhaps 10 meters on either side of the building. No vehicle could navigate even that distance without risking catastrophic error. And should such error occur, the occupants would be dead within the hour, frozen in poses of anguish and regret. So we do not use the motor cars. We remain. We wait. We survive. This is insane, Darrington said, his urbane facade cracking like thin ice. A man is dead, murdered, and we are simply expected to sit here and accept this imprisonment. There must be servants, groundskeepers, someone who can. The groundskeepers departed 3 days ago, Mrs. Good said quietly. Sir Reginald sent them away. He said there was no work to be done. They returned to the village, and the servants, those who reside on the estate, have been given leave to visit family for the Christmas season. They are not expected to return until January. Those who came with us are accounted for. They are in the kitchen, locked in their quarters by the snow and their own fear. I have spoken with them. They know nothing. They have seen nothing. The house, as far as they understand, contains only ourselves. The realization settled over the room like a burial shroud that they were alone, truly alone. A household of perhaps a dozen people, cut off from the outside world by weather and circumstance, with a corpse growing cold on the upper floor and a killer, who was almost certainly present in the room at that very moment. I have taken the liberty, Poirot continued, of securing the manor. All external doors have been locked and barred. The keys have been collected and are in my possession. Should anyone wish to leave, they must first convince me that departure is necessary, and then endure the journey through snow that resembles a living thing in its malevolence. I do not anticipate many requests. This is tyranny, Darrington protested. You have no authority. I have the authority granted to me by reason and by morality. Poirot interrupted, his voice like ice in a glass. The authority that comes when a murder has been committed and justice must be served. I am not the police. None. I am better than the police. I am Hercule Poirot, and I do not rest until truth has been uncovered and the guilty have been identified. He rose and moved toward the window. Outside, the snow continued its relentless descent, accumulating faster than it should have been possible to accumulate. It pressed against the windows as if trying to push them inward, to invade the sanctuary of the manor and carry away everything within. I have secured not only the external doors, Poirot continued without turning around, but also the room in which Sir Reginald's body rests. That room becomes, as of this moment, a sealed space. No one enters without my presence and my permission. To do so is to suggest guilt so profound that only an innocence cannot perceive its presence. The body will not be moved. It will not be disturbed. It will remain exactly as it was discovered until Hercule Poirot has completed his examination and drawn his conclusions. But that could take days, Miss Ashford said quietly. She had recovered from her fainting spell, but retained the translucent quality of someone who has glimpsed the ultimate horror. What do we do with ourselves? How do we exist, knowing that that the body is in the room above us? We exist as we have always existed, Poirot replied. We eat, we sleep, we move through the rooms of this manor as though the ordinary rules of ordinary life still apply. But we do so knowing that they do not, that we are all suspect, that none of us can trust anyone else, that the person sitting beside you might be the person who severed the head of Sir Reginald Whitmore and removed it from this manor, the location of which is a mystery that troubles even Hercule Poirot. He returned to his chair and settled himself with meticulous care, arranging his fingers precisely in his lap. Now, he said, we shall discuss the events of this evening. We shall discuss them thoroughly and systematically, and we shall not rest until every detail has been uncovered, examined, analyzed, and filed away in the little gray cells where truth resides. Harold raised his hand slightly, the gesture of a schoolboy seeking permission to speak. I was in my room, he said. I was reading. I heard nothing until the scream. What book? Poirot asked. I what? A book. I don't remember. Poetry, perhaps. A man reads, but remembers not the title of the volume he holds. Interesting. A man so distracted that words on a page could not penetrate his consciousness. A man in a state of profound psychological disturbance, would you say? Yes, perhaps. And yet, when the scream came so terrible, so absolute a sound, you rushed immediately to investigate. Of course I did. What else would? What else, indeed? Poirot mused. A man reading poetry, a man distracted, a man in distress suddenly animated by urgency. This suggests either guilt or the possibility of innocence so pure it cannot perceive its own rarity. I am not yet certain which. He turned his attention to Mr. Darrington. And you, sir? Where were you when the murder was discovered? Darrington's composure had re-established itself, though cracks remained visible beneath the surface. I was in my room, attempting to read myself into sleep. This household is exhausting, Mr. Poirot. The tensions, the silences, the sense that something terrible was impending. I sought refuge in the written word. Yet another man with books, Poirot observed. A household of readers then. How literary, how cultured. And yet, somehow I doubt that any of you were truly focused upon the plots before you. The mind, it has a curious capacity. It can appear focused upon one thing while actually being consumed by another entirely. This is the gift of human nature. Turned to Miss Ashford. And you, mademoiselle, where were you when the scream pierced the silence of this manner? Miss Ashford's hands trembled slightly. I was in my room as well. I had retired early. The tension, she gestured vaguely. I could not bear to remain in company. I was attempting to compose correspondence, letters that needed writing. At such an hour, letters of such urgency that they required composition at night. Personal correspondence, she said quietly, of a private nature. Ah, Poirot said, and the single syllable seemed to carry volumes of meaning. Private correspondence. How convenient, how protected from inquiry. And the letters, do they still exist? Might Hercule Poirot examine them? They are personal, she repeated, more firmly this time. And a man lies dead upstairs without his head. Poirot replied with equal firmness. The personal, mademoiselle, becomes public when murder enters the equation. You will provide those letters. Not now but soon. Perhaps very soon. He shifted his attention to Dr. Melville. Doctor, you have already confessed to being in your room. Reading, as well, I presume? A medical journal, Melville replied. Recent research on toxicology. The effects of certain compounds on the human nervous system. Poirot's eyes narrowed fractionally. Toxicology. How very timely. And these compounds, they are of academic interest only? Of course. I am a country doctor, Mr. Poirot. My interests are professional, theoretical. I read to maintain my knowledge. Yet you did not hear the scream immediately. You did not rush to investigate as the others did. You appeared on the corridor only after several minutes had elapsed. Why this delay in a physician who would normally respond with alacrity to sounds of human distress? I was absorbed in my reading, Melville said. The journal is quite engaging. By the time I had processed what I was hearing, others had already begun their investigation. Absorbed, Poirot repeated, as though tasting the word. A man absorbed by the toxicological effects of compounds on the nervous system, reading by candlelight in a room far removed from the screaming. Decides only after considerable delay that perhaps he should investigate. This absorption, it is most remarkable. He finally turned his attention to Lady Evangeline. And you, madam, where were you when your household erupted into chaos? Lady Evangeline's composure remained intact, though her eyes glistened with something fear, grief, or perhaps merely the reflection of firelight. I was in my bedroom, reading, attempting to sleep. When I heard the screams, I came immediately to investigate. And you encountered no one on the corridors? None of the household making their way toward the source of the disturbance? I passed Mrs. Good, Lady Evangeline said. She was ascending the stairs. Ascending, Poirot mused. You were descending, then, from the upper floors? Yet your bedroom is on the second floor, is it not? The same floor as the others? I had retired to the upper floors, Lady Evangeline said. I was in the library. I had gone there to retrieve a book. For sleep. A volume of poetry. Another reader. Another person absorbed in literature at the moment of murder. Mrs. Good spoke without prompting. I was in the kitchen, sir, preparing evening tea and arranging items for the morning breakfast. When I heard the scream, I came straight away. I was the first to reach the room, I believe. And what did you observe when you opened the door? Poirot asked gently. Mrs. Good's voice was steady, though her hands shook. I saw him, the body. I saw what had been done, and I screamed. That was the scream they all heard. It was not from upstairs. It was from me, from my own throat. An important clarification. The scream they all heard had not been some distant cry filtered through the manor's many corridors. It had been Mrs. Good's response to discovering the body. "And before you screamed?" Poirot pressed. "What did you observe?" "The wound, it was immediately obvious." "Yes," Mrs. Good whispered. "The absence. The terrible absence. There was blood. So much blood. But there was no head. Just nothing." Poirot rose and began to pace before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. "So we have established the following facts. Sir Reginald departed the dining room at approximately 8:30 in the evening. He was bound for his study, or so everyone believed. The scream was heard at approximately 10 o'clock. The body was discovered in his bedroom, not his study. And that body possessed a most remarkable and disturbing feature. It was headless." He paused, letting this sink in. "This tells us several things. First, the murder could not have occurred in the study where Sir Reginald was expected to be. It occurred in his bedroom, the most private of spaces. Second, someone knew that Sir Reginald would go to his bedroom. Someone knew his intentions, despite his statement that he was bound for the study. Third, the head was removed after death. This much is certain from the nature of the wound. A severing performed post-mortem suggests not a crime of passion, but a crime of design. A crime meant to send a message." "What message?" Harold asked, his voice barely audible. "Ah," Poirot said, turning to face him. "That is the question that must be answered. What could the removal of a head communicate? What meaning could such an act possibly carry? Decapitation, it is a statement. It is an expression. It is language written in blood and in horror." The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney like demonic fairies ascending to heaven. "I propose the following," Poirot continued. "We shall all retire to our chambers. Mrs. Good will ensure that hot beverages and light meals are provided. Each of you will remain in your assigned room. I shall keep the keys to the main corridors. No one moves without my permission. At dawn, we shall begin interviews in earnest. Individual interviews, private conversations in which each of you shall have the opportunity to tell me the truth, or at least to construct lies that are sufficiently sophisticated to require Hercule Poirot's considerable intellect to unravel them." "This is imprisonment," Darrington protested again. This is survival," Poirot said sharply. "A murderer walks among us. A murderer who has demonstrated the ability to plan, to execute a crime of stunning violence and deliberation, and to remove evidence in a manner that suggests both strength and ruthlessness. That person might kill again. They might see any of you as a threat. They might decide that additional murders would serve to obscure the truth. And so, Hercule Poirot, he ensures that such further violence becomes more difficult. We are not imprisoned, Monsieur Darrington. We are protected, even if you do not yet comprehend from whom." As the household slowly filed out toward their various chambers, Hastings approached Poirot and spoke quietly. "You believe it's one of them? That the killer is within this group?" "Of course," Poirot replied. "There is no other possibility. The head has not left the manor, this I am certain of. The murderer remains here, within these walls, waiting perhaps to see if Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth or if luck will favor the guilty. But why? What could motivate such a crime? The removal of the head, it's almost ritualistic." Poirot moved to the window and gazed out at the snow. Beyond the glass, the world had become entirely white, entirely featureless, entirely consumed by winter's consuming fury. "The head," he said softly, "is the seat of thought. It is the repository of memory, of knowledge, of everything that makes a man uniquely himself. To remove the head is to erase identity. To remove the head is to say, this man no longer existed. This man's thoughts, his knowledge, his memories, they matter no longer. They must be erased from the world." He turned back to Hastings, and his eyes held a depth of sadness that suggested he had glimpsed something in the darkness. Beyond the windows, some truth about human nature that was too terrible to articulate fully. Someone in this manner, Poirot said, feared what Sir Reginald knew, feared it so profoundly that they were willing to commit murder most horrible. And the removal of his head, it is an attempt to ensure that those secrets die with him, that knowledge dies with him, that the truth remains buried beneath snow and blood and the accumulated sins of years. Outside, the wind screamed like a creature in agony. Inside, The manor fell into a silence more terrifying than any sound. Dawn broke gray and reluctant, as though the world itself questioned whether light should return to a place where such darkness had taken root. The snow continued falling, though with less urgency now. It simply accumulated, patient and relentless, burying the manor deeper beneath its weight. Poirot had slept fitfully, his dreams populated by headless figures that wandered the corridors of Whitmore Manor, seeking the faces they had lost. He rose before 6 in the morning and positioned himself in the small study, adjacent to the sitting room, arranging it with meticulous care. A chair for the guest, a chair for himself, a table between them bearing a pot of tea and paper upon which to record observations. The stage was set for the drama of truth-telling to commence. Harold was summoned first. The young man arrived with obvious reluctance, his eyes darting around the study as though seeking escape routes. He wore a shirt with yesterday's wrinkles, and his carefully maintained hair had lost its shape, giving him an appearance simultaneously older and younger than his actual years. "Please, sit," Poirot said, gesturing to the chair opposite. "I wish merely to have a conversation between two men of some education and sensibility. Nothing more, of course," Harold said, settling into the chair with the grace of a man sitting in the electric chair awaiting execution. "Tell me about your relationship with your brother-in-law," Poirot began. "How long have you known him?" "Nearly 30 years, Harold replied. "Since my sister married him. I was quite young at the time, and that relationship, it was always cordial." Harold hesitated. "Mostly. Reginald is a man of strong opinions, strong personality. He is not easy to know. But yes, cordial enough. Yet something has changed recently," Poirot observed. 3 weeks ago, according to Miss Ashford's meticulous records, his patterns altered dramatically. He began taking meals alone. He became withdrawn. He spent hours in his study. Something precipitated this change. What was it? "I don't know," Harold said, too quickly. "You do not know," Poirot repeated. "Or you do not wish to say?" "I genuinely do not know," Harold insisted. Evangeline mentioned receiving a letter. Something upset him greatly, but he would not discuss it with anyone. "A letter," Poirot mused. "From whom? About what?" "I cannot say." He revealed nothing. Poirot rose and began to pace slowly round Harold, studying him from different angles as one might examine a sculpture. "You manage the estate, yes? This would give you access to all financial records, all correspondence, all arrangements related to the property and its income?" "Yes," Harold admitted, "though I merely administer according to Reginald's instructions." "And have those instructions changed recently? Any unusual orders? Any requests that seemed strange or unprecedented?" "No, nothing that I can recall." "And yet you inherit now, do you not?" Poirot asked softly. "With your brother-in-law deceased, and assuming he left no children, there are no children. I have confirmed the estate passes to your sister, and thus to you as the male heir and manager. You inherit a considerable property, a considerable income. This is a matter of some significance, would you say?" Harold's face flushed. "You cannot possibly suggest I had nothing to do with his death." "I suggest nothing," Poirot replied. "I merely observe that you stand to gain from his demise. This is what we call motive, Monsieur Harold. Perhaps not sufficient motive. We must also consider means and opportunity. But motive is present. This cannot be denied." "I was in my room," Harold protested. Reading, yes. Yet you did not hear the scream immediately. You did not rush to investigate at once. You appeared on the corridor only after Miss Ashford had emerged from her room. Why this delay?" "I told you I was absorbed. Absorbed by a book whose title you cannot remember. A book of poetry that captivated you so completely that the screams of a household member did not immediately penetrate your consciousness. This level of absorption, Monsieur Harold, it is either remarkable or it is invented. Which is it?" Harold said nothing, his hands clenched in his lap. "I think," Poirot continued softly, "that you were not reading at all. I think you were doing something else, something that required your full attention, something that you do not wish to reveal. Perhaps something in your room that should not be there. Perhaps something that would reflect poorly upon you." "Yes, I want to see a lawyer," Harold said suddenly. "I will not continue this conversation without legal counsel." "Ah," Poirot said, returning to his chair. You wish for legal counsel. This is interesting. For a man who is innocent, who merely read poetry while murder was being committed, why would legal counsel be necessary? The innocent, they welcome the opportunity to assist in the investigation. They do not request lawyers, but you request a lawyer. This suggests that something you have done or something you know is sufficiently problematic, that you require professional protection. I'm done, Harold said, rising. I'm going back to my room. Of course, Poirot said, gesturing dismissively. We shall continue this conversation later when you have had time to reflect, to contemplate the wisdom of cooperation versus the consequences of obstruction. After Harold departed, Poirot sat in silence for several minutes. His fingers steepled before his face, his eyes closed. When he opened them, Hastings appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by telepathy. He's hiding something, Hastings said. Of course, Poirot agreed. But whether it is related to the murder or merely to his own private shame, that remains to be determined. We must distinguish between guilt of commission and guilt of circumstance. Now, bring me Miss Ashford. She interests me greatly. Miss Ashford arrived with her notebook clutched in her hands like a shield. She sat very straight, her face composed into an expression of cooperative neutrality. I understand you maintain precise records of household arrangements, Poirot began. 3 weeks ago, something changed. Sir Reginald began taking meals alone. He began withdrawing from household social contact. And you, with your meticulous records, you must have observed the precipitating event. What was it? Miss Ashford's jaw tightened slightly. I merely record what I observe, Mr. Poirot. I do not interpret events. And yet interpretation is implicit in selection. You record some things and not others. You have chosen to record the date of Sir Reginald's withdrawal, but not the cause. Why? Did your employer specifically instruct you not to inquire into or record the reason? He did not wish it discussed, Miss Ashford said quietly. But you were curious, Poirot pressed. A woman of intelligence, a woman who maintains meticulous records, who takes pride in precision and accuracy, such a woman would naturally be curious about the reason for such a dramatic change in household routine. Did you observe the letter? Did you see it? Miss Ashford hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Poirot perceived the truth. You did see it, he said. You observed the letter. You know from whom it came. What did it say, mademoiselle? I cannot reveal that, Miss Ashford said. It was addressed to Sir Reginald. It was private correspondence. Private correspondence, Poirot repeated. From whom? A woman, a business associate, a blackmailer? From a woman, Miss Ashford admitted reluctantly. That much I can determine from the handwriting and the salutation. But beyond that, I cannot say. The envelope, where is it? Sir Reginald burned it in the fireplace. I observed him do so the evening he received it. Burned it, Poirot mused. Destroying evidence. Evidence of what? An affair, a secret? Blackmail? I do not know, Miss Ashford said, and Poirot believed her. But you have your suspicions. He continued. Tell me, Miss Ashford was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Sir Reginald had a past, before he married Lady Evangeline. I know this because I found correspondence years ago. I was not snooping, you understand. I was simply organizing his files. There were letters from someone, a woman, someone he had known intimately. The letters suggested a relationship that had not ended well. They suggested regret, perhaps guilt. And you believe this woman reached out to him recently? 3 weeks ago. It is possible, Miss Ashford said. The handwriting was similar to those old letters. Not identical. 30 years makes changes, but similar in character and formation. Poirot stood and moved to the window. The snow continued its endless accumulation. You were writing letters last evening, he said, not turning around. Private correspondence. Were those letters related to Sir Reginald? To this mysterious woman from his past? No, Miss Ashford said firmly. They were entirely personal. Nothing to do with the household or Sir Reginald. Yet you refused to show them to me. Why? Because they were personal, she repeated. A woman has the right to privacy in her correspondence. A woman has many rights, Poirot agreed, until she becomes complicit in murder. Then those rights become negotiable. I will examine those letters, mademoiselle. Not now, but very soon. Perhaps this afternoon. Perhaps this evening. But I will examine them." Miss Ashford rose without permission. "May I go?" "You may," Poirot said. "But mademoiselle, find me that letter. Find where Sir Reginald preserved the correspondence from the woman from his past. It is evidence. It is crucial. Find it, or I shall assume your refusal to cooperate suggests a level of involvement that will reflect poorly indeed upon your character." Dr. Melville was next. He arrived calm and composed, his professional demeanor intact like armor. "I understand you were reading about toxicology," Poirot began without preamble. "Compounds that affect the nervous system. Were you merely pursuing academic curiosity, or were you investigating something more specific?" "Academic curiosity," Melville replied evenly. "I receive medical journals regularly. I attempt to remain current with developments in my field. Yet toxicology is not a subject that typically concerns a country doctor. You treat colds, minor injuries, the occasional case of influenza. Why toxicology?" "It is my belief that a physician should maintain broad knowledge," Melville said. "One never knows when such information might prove useful." "Indeed," Poirot mused. "One never knows. Tell me, doctor, how long have you known Sir Reginald?" "Perhaps 15 years. I was called to attend to him during an illness some years back. We formed an acquaintance. An acquaintance or a friendship? A professional relationship," Melville said carefully. "And yet you remained here during the storm. You were offered hospitality. Why? A country doctor has patients in the village who might require his attention. Why choose to remain here?" Melville's composure flickered for just a moment. Sir Reginald insisted. He said he preferred to have medical attention readily available. He was concerned about his health. "His health," Poirot repeated. "What specific health concerns?" He did not specify. He was a man who kept his own counsel regarding such matters. "Yet you examined him? As his physician, you must have conducted examinations?" "Not recently. Not in the past weeks." "Interesting," Poirot said. "He insisted you remain in the house for health concerns, yet you performed no examination. This suggests either that the health concerns were psychological rather than physical, or that your presence here served some other purpose. Which is it?" Melville stood. "I don't appreciate the implication, Mr. Poirot. I came because I was asked. I remained because of the weather. I have done nothing wrong." "Have you not?" Poirot asked gently. "Then why do you lie about the contents of your medical journal? I examined your room this morning. Your journal was not about toxicology at all. It was about the effects of various poisons on human physiology. A significant difference, would you say? Toxicology is theoretical. Poisons are practical. Which were you studying, doctor? Theory or practice?" Melville's face had gone pale. He left the room without answering. Poirot sank back in his chair, the weight of accumulated truths and concealed secrets pressing down upon him like a physical force. 3 suspects, 3 evasions, 3 secrets. And somewhere in the manor, the head of Sir Reginald Whitmore remained hidden physical evidence of a crime. That seemed to grow more complex with each passing hour. The investigation had only begun, but already the little gray cells perceived the outline of a terrible conspiracy. The afternoon brought a revelation that shattered the remaining pretense of civility. Poirot had taken his luncheon alone, contemplating the peculiar geometry of truth that seemed to surround this crime. The head remained missing. This was central. A man could be murdered without his head being removed, but this killer had specifically taken that head, had carried it away from the bedroom, through the corridors of the manor, and somewhere he had concealed it. Where? This question gnawed at Poirot's consciousness like a rat trapped in a wall. At 3 o'clock precisely, Mrs. Good knocked upon his study door. She was carrying a small wooden box, her weathered hands trembling as she held it. "I found something, sir," she said quietly, "in Sir Reginald's study, hidden behind a loose stone in the fireplace. I thought you should know." Poirot accepted the box and opened it carefully. Inside lay a collection of letters, perhaps 30 or 40, all written in the same feminine hand. The paper was expensive, the ink a distinctive shade of violet. As Poirot withdrew the first letter and unfolded it, the words revealed a history of passion and pain that spanned decades. "My Reginald," it began, "3 days have passed since you left, and I cannot bear this silence. You promised you would write. You promised you would not abandon me to this torment of uncertainty. Have you forgotten what we were to each other? Have the years dimmed what burned so brightly between us? The letter was undated, but the paper suggested age perhaps 30 years or more. Poirot withdrew another letter, then another. A narrative unfolded, a love affair, a relationship that had ended not through mutual agreement, but through betrayal. The woman she signed herself only as E had been pregnant, abandoned, left to face scandal and ruin while Sir Reginald married another woman and ascended to social prominence. Who was she? Poirot asked Mrs. Good. Did Sir Reginald ever speak of her? No, sir, Mrs. Good said. But I knew. Before I came to work for the family, I lived in the village. There was a woman, a governess. She was very beautiful. She and Sir Reginald were seen together. Then she left suddenly. It was said she had gone away to have a child. The father was never named. The child, yes, Poirot pressed. The child was never born, Mrs. Good said quietly. Or so the story went. There was some kind of accident. The woman never returned to the village. She disappeared entirely. Poirot held the letters, feeling their weight both literally and metaphorically. Physical evidence of a sin committed decades before. A sin that had been carried in silence, in secret, in hidden letters preserved and reread over the years. 3 weeks ago, Poirot said. She wrote to him again. After 30 years of silence, she wrote. Why? What could have prompted this? Was she dying? Did she wish reconciliation? Or was it something else? The most recent letter was dated exactly 3 weeks prior. Poirot withdrew it and read, Reginald, it began. Forgive me for reaching out after so many years. I have been ill, very ill, and I find that approaching death brings a kind of clarity that living rarely provides. I have a daughter, our daughter. She is 30 years old now, and she knows nothing of you. She believes her father dead. I have decided that she deserves to know the truth. I am coming to Yorkshire in the new year. I intend to tell her everything. I intend to tell her about you. I thought you should know. I thought you deserved that courtesy, at least. I arrive on December 28th. We need to talk. We need to discuss what comes next. For her sake, if not for ours. Yours in memory and in grief. The letter fell from Poirot's hands like something corrupted. A daughter, he whispered. A 30-year-old daughter. And she was arriving in 3 days' time. There was someone, Mrs. Good said hesitantly. A young woman. She arrived yesterday afternoon. Sir Reginald was quite shocked to see her. He sent for her in his study. They were closeted together for more than an hour. When she left, Sir Reginald looked broken, devastated. I have never seen a man look quite so damaged. Where is this young woman now? Poirot demanded. In the East Wing, sir. She was provided with a room. She has been keeping to herself. She takes meals in her room. I believe she is quite distressed. Poirot rose and moved toward the door. Her name? Miss Caroline Ashford, sir. She is. Mrs. Good paused. She is Miss Charlotte Ashford's daughter. I believe there is some complication there as well. The two do not speak to each other, though they are clearly related. The resemblance is quite remarkable. The revelation struck Poirot like a physical blow. Charlotte Ashford, the secretary, the woman who maintained meticulous records, the woman who had witnessed the letter 30 years ago. She was the daughter of the woman from Sir Reginald's past, a woman who had grown to adulthood not knowing her father's identity, a woman who had been hired as secretary to the very man who had abandoned her mother. Coincidence? No, Hercule Poirot did not believe in coincidence. Bring them both to me, Poirot said. Miss Charlotte Ashford and Miss Caroline Ashford. Bring them here, to this study, in 15 minutes. And Mrs. Good, tell no one of this conversation. No one must know that these letters have been discovered. Do you understand? Mrs. Good nodded and departed. Poirot returned to his desk and spread the letters before him like cards in a game of fate. The narrative was becoming clearer. A man, Sir Reginald, who had betrayed a woman and abandoned a child, who had hidden the evidence of that betrayal in letters preserved in secret, who had, 3 weeks ago, learned that his sins were about to be revealed, that his daughter was coming to Yorkshire, that the truth would finally emerge. But then he had been murdered with a specific violence that suggested not mere passion, but calculated intention. The head removed, identity erased, an attempt to ensure that his secrets died with him. 15 minutes later, Miss Charlotte Ashford and Miss Caroline Ashford entered the study together. The resemblance between them was indeed striking. Similar bone structure, similar eyes, though separated in age by perhaps 35 years. Caroline was a younger version of Charlotte, yet sadder, more confused. Charlotte's face was carefully composed, but her hands betrayed her. They trembled visibly. "Sit. Please," Poirot said gently. "I have some information that I believe both of you should hear." He told them about the letters. He watched as Charlotte's composure collapsed entirely and tears streamed down her face. He watched as Caroline's expression transformed from confusion to understanding to something far more complex, a blending of anger, grief, and a kind of desperate longing for a father she had never known. "My mother came to find him," Caroline said quietly. "She was dying. She wanted him to know me. She wanted me to know him. She brought me here under the pretense of a family visit. I didn't understand the full situation until after we arrived. And then he was killed." "Did you speak with him?" Poirot asked. "Only briefly," Caroline said. "He was shocked to see me, devastated. He said he needed time to process the situation. He said we would talk more in the morning." But then her voice broke. Poirot turned to Charlotte. "And you? Did you know your sister was Sir Reginald's daughter?" "No," Charlotte said through her tears. "I did not know until she arrived. I suspected when I was younger. I found those old letters. I realized my mother had been involved with someone significant. But I never knew who he was until Caroline arrived and I saw Sir Reginald's reaction. Then I understood, and I realized that I had been working for my own father all these years, that he had known somehow, that perhaps," she broke off, "that perhaps what?" Poirot pressed gently. "That perhaps he had hired me intentionally," Charlotte said. "That he had known exactly who I was from the moment he offered me employment. 7 years ago. 7 years of working for a man who was my father, who never acknowledged that connection, who made me believe I was merely his secretary." The weight of accumulated deception and hidden truth seemed to press down upon the room, like a physical force. "I need to ask you both something," Poirot said, "and I need absolute honesty. Where was each of you yesterday evening when Sir Reginald was murdered?" Caroline was in her room, Charlotte said immediately. "I was in my room as well, doing exactly as I said, writing letters. Writing to my mother, actually, telling her the truth of the situation, that I had discovered who she had been involved with, that I had been working for my own father without knowing it." "And you did not leave your room at any point?" "No," Charlotte said firmly. "And Caroline?" "No," the younger woman confirmed. "I was too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. I remained in my room, thinking, trying to process. I didn't hear the scream until it was nearly over." Poirot studied both women carefully. He perceived truth in their words, but he also perceived the possibility of loyalty, of one sister protecting the other, of women bound by shared circumstances, shared secrets, shared blood. "You will remain available for further questioning," he said finally. "But I believe your accounts, and I believe that you should know something. Sir Reginald was beginning to do the right thing. He was about to acknowledge you, Caroline. He was about to embrace you. He was about to try, however inadequately, to repair the damage that he had caused. His death prevented that reconciliation." Caroline began to weep, and Charlotte held her sister close, a gesture that suggested that, despite the complications of their relationship, blood and shared trauma had forged a bond between them. After they departed, Poirot sat in silence, contemplating the vast machinery of human suffering. A man kept from his daughter by pride and cowardice. A woman hidden away with a child born of love and abandoned to shame. A daughter raised without knowing her father, then thrust suddenly into proximity with him only to have him taken away. And somewhere within this tangle of emotion and deception, a murderer waited. As evening approached and snow continued to fall with unabated persistence, Poirot began to perceive the shape of the crime more clearly. Multiple motives were becoming visible. Multiple threads were beginning to converge. And he understood now that whoever had killed Sir Reginald had done so not from simple passion or simple greed, but from a complex web of revenge, protection, and perhaps even mercy. The truth, when it finally emerged, would be far more complicated than anyone could imagine. By the evening of the second day, Whitmore Manor had become a pressure cooker of accumulated tension and exposed secrets. The dining room was nearly silent as the household gathered for dinner. No one spoke beyond what was strictly necessary. The food was consumed mechanically. The wine was drunk without appreciation. All present seemed to be waiting for something: judgment, perhaps, or revelation, or the next terrible thing that this house might produce. Poirot had spent the afternoon conducting interviews with Mr. Darrington. The businessman's composure had gradually unraveled as Poirot revealed what he had discovered about Darrington's true purpose in being at Whitmore Manor. "You were not here to discuss financial matters," Poirot had said. "You were here because Sir Reginald owed you a considerable sum of money lost in a business venture that failed through his negligence and incompetence. You were here to collect on a debt that he had been avoiding for nearly 2 years. Darrington had admitted it, finally. Yes, Sir Reginald owed him nearly £15,000, a sum so substantial that it could bankrupt both men if it came to light. Darrington had come to the manor ostensibly as a guest, but in truth as a creditor, hoping to force a settlement, or at minimum to secure Sir Reginald's agreement to a payment plan. And did he agree? Poirot had asked. No, Darrington had replied bitterly. He said he would rather die than pay me another shilling. He said he had consulted with his solicitor, and that the debt was unrecoverable through legal means. He said that I could see him if I wished, but that I would get nothing, as he had shifted most of his assets into his wife's name. The man was diabolical. He was blackguard. Yet you did not kill him, Poirot had observed, though you had motive and opportunity. Why? Because I didn't, Darrington had protested. Yes, I was angry. Yes, I wanted revenge. But murder? That's something else entirely. Besides, his death doesn't solve my problem. If anything, it makes it worse. The estate is tied up in legal proceedings now. I'll never see a penny of what he owed me. The logic was sound. Poirot had observed that Darrington's alibi in his room, attempting to sleep, remained unverified. But the lack of motive for the actual murder was significant. Now, as they sat around the dining table in uncomfortable silence, Poirot watched the household with the intensity of a man observing a complex mechanism, trying to understand which gear, which spring, which lever had finally failed and caused the entire device to collapse. Harold ate with mechanical precision, his eyes fixed on his plate. Mrs. Good moved through the room with her customary efficiency, though her movements seemed slower, more labored, as though grief had added invisible weight to her body. Dr. Melville sat with his usual composure, though his fingers drummed occasionally against the table in an irregular rhythm that suggested nervousness poorly concealed. Darrington drank more wine than he ate food, his jaw clenched. Miss Charlotte Ashford was absent. Poirot had given her permission to take dinner with her sister in their shared room, and Lady Evangeline sat at the head of the table in her husband's former place, her face a mask of wifely grief that somehow seemed slightly too rehearsed, slightly too perfect. After dinner was concluded, and the household had dispersed to various parts of the manor, Poirot requested that Lady Evangeline join him in the library. She arrived dressed in black, her hair pinned back with severity, her expression a study in composed sorrow. "Madam," Poirot began, "I have a question for you. A difficult question, perhaps, but one that must be asked. When did you learn of your husband's past? Of the woman he had abandoned? Of the daughter he had never acknowledged?" Lady Evangeline's face tightened. She said nothing. "You knew," Poirot continued. "I am certain of it. A woman such as yourself, intelligent, observant, aware of household matters, you knew long before Sir Reginald received that final letter. Perhaps you discovered it in the early years of your marriage. Perhaps you found evidence of his infidelity, his shame, his carefully hidden past. What did you do with that knowledge, madam?" "I accepted it," Lady Evangeline said quietly. "Men have pasts. Men make mistakes. It was not my place to judge him for sins committed before he knew me. And yet you remained silent," Poirot observed. "For 30 years, you remained silent. You allowed a woman to suffer in exile. You allowed a child to grow up without knowing her father. You allowed your husband to carry his guilt in secret. Why such magnanimity, such suffering in silence?" "Because I loved him," Lady Evangeline said, and her voice cracked with genuine emotion. Despite everything, despite his infidelity, his lies, his shameful treatment of that woman, I loved him, and I hoped that eventually he would find peace, that he would find forgiveness from her if possible, or from himself if not. Yet when forgiveness finally arrived, Poirot said gently, when that woman wrote to him 3 weeks ago, when she announced that she intended to tell their daughter the truth, Sir Reginald did not meet it with peace. He did not greet it with relief. Instead, he withdrew. He became erratic. He began behaving as a man who had seen his carefully constructed life begin to crumble. Yes, Lady Evangeline admitted, he was terrified. Terrified that the truth would destroy everything he had built. Terrified that his daughter would hate him. Terrified that society would judge him. And what did you feel? Poirot asked, when you realized that his past was finally catching up with him. Lady Evangeline was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I felt relief. I felt as though a weight had been lifted. I felt as though finally, he would have to face what he had done. That the truth would force him to become better than he was. That perhaps, in his remaining years, he might actually find redemption. Yet someone murdered him before redemption could occur, Poirot observed. Someone ensured that whatever transformation might have been beginning would be cut short. Who would benefit from such an outcome, madam? Who among those in this household would prefer that your husband remain forever bound to his secrets, rather than freed by truth? Lady Evangeline's eyes filled with tears. I don't know, Mr. Poirot. I truly don't know. Then let me propose something, Poirot said. What if the person who murdered Sir Reginald did so not to prevent truth, but to protect it? What if the murderer was someone who believed that the truth about Sir Reginald's past was so shameful, so destructive, that it could not be allowed to emerge? What if the murderer believed they were protecting someone else, perhaps someone they love? Understanding flickered across Lady Evangeline's face. You don't mean, I mean precisely what I say, Poirot interrupted. If a mother wished to protect her daughter from the knowledge that her father was a man of betrayal and abandonment, what might she do? If she had recently reconnected with that father only to discover that he was precisely the man she had feared he would be, weak, shameful, unworthy, what lengths might she go to ensure that her daughter never learned the full truth of his nature? Lady Evangeline rose abruptly. I will not sit here and listen to this. You're suggesting that, I am suggesting, Poirot said calmly, that the head of Sir Reginald Whitmore was removed as a statement, as a deliberate erasure of identity, as an attempt to ensure that he could not be definitively identified, could not be connected to his past crimes, could not be forced to face the consequences of what he had done. I am suggesting that someone in this household loved another person more than they valued life or justice, and I am suggesting that this person believed they were committing an act of protection. After Lady Evangeline departed, clearly shaken, Poirot remained in the library long into the night, surrounded by books that held the accumulated wisdom of centuries, yet could not explain the particular madness of human love and human protection. By dawn of the third day, the investigation had reached a critical juncture. The head of Sir Reginald Whitmore had been discovered not in some remote location, but in a chimney space in the West Wing, carefully wrapped in burlap and canvas. The discovery had come through Poirot's systematic examination of the manor's structural peculiarities. He had realized that someone would have needed to conceal the head quickly, efficiently, without drawing attention. A chimney that was no longer in use, that connected to a sealed-off room, would be perfect. The head was in an advanced state of decomposition, but it was identifiable. More importantly, wrapped with it was a note, written in Charlotte Ashford's hand. Forgive me. Forgive us. We could not bear for the truth to destroy her. That single sentence made everything clear. The morning of the third day dawned with a strange clarity. The snow had finally ceased its relentless descent, as though the sky itself had exhausted its store of winter's fury. Sunlight filtered through the windows of Whitmore Manor for the first time since Poirot's arrival, illuminating dust motes that danced like spirits celebrating their newfound freedom. Poirot sat in his study, examining the note that had been found with the head. The handwriting was definitely Charlotte Ashford's. Poirot had compared it to her correspondence, her household records, her personal letters. Every character was consistent with what he knew of her neat, precise penmanship. But handwriting could be imitated. and a note left deliberately at a crime scene could be calculated misdirection. He closed his eyes and allowed his mind to walk through the events of the evening in question. He visualized the manner as it had been Sir Reginald departing from the dining room at 8:30, ostensibly bound for his study, the household dispersing to their various chambers, the hours passing in an illusion of normalcy concealing the terrible machinery of murder being set into motion, the scream at 10 o'clock, Mrs. Good discovering the body, the terrible absence of the head. Poirot opened his eyes and rose to his feet. He had perceived something, a detail that had been troubling him since the initial discovery. He made his way to the second floor and, with the key he had secured from the household, unlocked the bedroom in which Sir Reginald's body lay. The body had been moved, now taken, to a makeshift mortuary in the manor's cooling cellar, pending the arrival of authorities once the roads became passable. But the room itself remained undisturbed. Poirot stood in the doorway, allowing his eyes to travel across every surface, every object, every detail. The furniture stood as it had been. The carpet bore the stains of Sir Reginald's blood, though it had dried now to a rust-brown color. The windows remained closed and locked. The door bore no signs of forced entry. It had been opened from the inside by someone, likely Mrs. Good, who had discovered the body. Poirot moved slowly round the room, his fingers trailing along the furniture, his eyes marking each particular detail. He paused at the bed. He examined the linens. He observed that they had been disturbed, as though someone had lain upon them recently. He noted the faint impression of a head upon the pillow. Then he moved to the fireplace. Like much of the manor, this room possessed a substantial fireplace. The grate was empty. No fire had been lit in some time, but there were ashes present. Poirot knelt and examined them carefully. Paper, books or letters, perhaps, material that had been deliberately burned. He was rising to his feet when he noticed something that made him pause. A thread, a single thread of fabric, caught on the inside of the fireplace grate. It was red, a deep crimson red. Poirot retrieved a handkerchief and carefully extracted the thread, examining it in the light from the window. Expensive fabric, fine weave, the kind of thread that came from quality garments. He held it up to the light, and his eyes narrowed. He had seen this exact shade of crimson before very recently. In fact, it was the color of Mrs. Good's dressing gown. Poirot descended to the kitchen, where he found the housekeeper preparing the midday meal. She looked up as he entered, her face showing no particular emotion at his presence. "Mrs. Good," he said quietly, "I must ask you a question. Where were you when Sir Reginald was murdered?" "I told you," Mrs. Good replied without looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. "I was in the kitchen, preparing tea, and then you heard the scream and rushed upstairs. You were the first person to discover the body." "Yes," Mrs. Good confirmed. "And in your haste to investigate," Poirot continued, "you tore a thread from your dressing gown on the fireplace grate in Sir Reginald's bedroom. A small tear, barely noticeable. The kind of thing that could occur quite easily if one were moving quickly through a space." Mrs. Good's hands stilled. She set down her knife with deliberate care. "You were in the bedroom before the scream," Poirot said. "You were there when Sir Reginald was murdered. You may not have wielded the blade yourself, but you were present. You were complicit. And afterward, you discovered the body, and you screamed a scream so genuine, so terrible, that everyone believed it to be a response to the discovery, rather than a reaction to what you had already witnessed. Double quotes. Mrs. Good turned to face him. Her weathered face was composed, but her eyes held a depth of sorrow that spoke of terrible decisions, made under impossible circumstances. "He was a good man," she said quietly. "Not in the ways that mattered. Not in the ways that cost him nothing, but underneath all his lies and his cowardice, underneath the shameful things he had done, there was goodness. I knew it. I had seen it in small gestures, in moments when he thought no one was watching." "Tell me what happened," Poirot said gently. Mrs. Good sat down heavily on a kitchen stool. "The girl came to me," she said. "Miss Charlotte. She was devastated when she realized the truth, that the man she worked for, that she had served faithfully for 7 years, was her own father. And worse, that he had known, that he had hired her deliberately, perhaps as some form of penance or self-torture. She came to me and she wept. She said she couldn't bear it. She said that if her sister, if Miss Caroline, learned the full truth about Sir Reginald, that it would destroy her, that it would poison her entire life. Poirot listened without interrupting. Miss Charlotte said she had a plan. Mrs. Good continued. A way to ensure that the truth died with Sir Reginald. A way to protect Miss Caroline from ever knowing exactly what kind of man her father had been. It was wrong, I knew that. But she broke off, unable to continue. You helped her, Poirot said. You conspired with her to murder Sir Reginald. No, Mrs. Good said firmly. I did not murder him. I would never raise my hand against a person, no matter the provocation. But I helped her conceal the crime. After it was done, after someone else had acted, I helped her hide the evidence. Who? Poirot demanded. Who murdered Sir Reginald? If not Miss Charlotte, then who? Mrs. Good shook her head. I cannot say. I gave my word. Miss Charlotte gave me her word that she would accept the consequences if the truth came out. But she made me swear that I would not name the person who actually committed the act. She said it didn't matter. She said that she bore full responsibility. Poirot understood then. The note that had been discovered with the head, it had been deliberate. Charlotte Ashford had written it knowing that it would be found, knowing that it would direct suspicion toward her, knowing that it would protect the actual murderer. It was Miss Caroline, Poirot said. Sir Reginald's daughter murdered him. She came to Yorkshire expecting to find a father. Instead, she found a man who was ashamed of her existence, a man who had hidden away the evidence of her birth, a man who had never, in 30 years, shown any inclination toward acknowledging his responsibility. The confrontation was painful, unbearable, and in a moment of rage, of despair, of absolute rejection, she acted. Mrs. Good did not confirm or deny this, but her silence was eloquent. And afterward, Poirot continued. Miss Charlotte discovered what had happened. She found her sister, and she realized the truth. She realized that her sister had acted out of desperation, out of the crushing weight of discovering that her father regarded her as an embarrassment, as a secret to be kept hidden. And Miss Charlotte made a choice. She decided to protect her sister. She decided to bear the guilt, to write that note, to arrange for the head to be discovered in a way that would implicate her. That girl deserves protection, Mrs. Good said firmly. She did a terrible thing, yes, but she did it in pain. In the moment of being utterly rejected by the man she had traveled across the world to find. If you arrest her, if you expose her to trial, you will only compound the tragedy. And so you believe, Poirot said, that by allowing Miss Charlotte to accept the blame, you are serving justice? I believe, Mrs. Good said, that justice has very little to do with truth. Justice is about what society needs to believe. And what society needs to believe is that crimes are committed by criminals, by people who are fundamentally bad, fundamentally different from themselves. If they learn that a young woman of good character, driven to desperation by familial rejection, committed murder, it will frighten them. It will force them to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. So Miss Charlotte will serve her time. Perhaps the truth will eventually emerge and she will be pardoned. Or perhaps it will not. But Miss Caroline can live. Miss Caroline can build a life. And that, Mr. Poirot, is the only justice that matters in this situation. Poirot stood quietly, the weight of Mrs. Good's words pressing down upon him like snow accumulating on a roof. He understood, then truly understood, why Sir Reginald's head had been removed. It was not merely an attempt to prevent identification. It was a statement of erasure, an attempt to ensure that the man who had caused so much pain, so much suffering, would cease to exist entirely, that his identity would be obliterated, that he would become not a man but an absence, a terrible gap in the world, where a father should have been, where love should have existed, but had never emerged. The removal of the head was an act of violence, certainly, but it was also an act of profound desperation. A young woman's attempt to eliminate the source of her pain by eliminating the possibility that he could ever hurt her or anyone else again. That evening, Poirot gathered the household in the dining room. The atmosphere was expectant, tense. All present understood that the moment of revelation had arrived. The detective moved to the head of the table, a position usually occupied by Sir Reginald, now empty and somehow more present in its emptiness than any physical form could have been. We have reached the point in the investigation, Poirot announced. where truth and falsehood must finally be separated, where the careful structures of concealment must collapse, and the underlying reality must be exposed to light. This is always a difficult moment. The human heart prefers comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. And yet, justice demands honesty. Truth demands revelation. So I shall tell you what occurred. He paused, allowing his eyes to move across each face in the room. A man arrives at Whitmore Manor. Poirot began. A man named Sir Reginald Whitmore, a man of privilege and position. But this man carries secrets, dark secrets. 30 years ago, he abandoned a woman who loved him, a woman who was carrying his child. He married another woman, Lady Evangeline, and he ascended to social prominence, all the while hiding the evidence of his shame in carefully preserved letters, hidden away from common scrutiny. He moved slowly around the table as he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of narrative truth. 3 weeks ago, he continued, that abandoned woman reaches out. She is dying. She wishes her daughter to know the truth about her father. She announces her intention to come to Yorkshire, to make the revelation, to force a reckoning with the past. He paused at Lady Evangeline's chair. This terrifies Sir Reginald. The comfortable life he has constructed is about to collapse. His wife discovers his anxiety. She attempts to help him, to encourage him toward honesty and reconciliation. But Sir Reginald is too frightened, too proud, too damaged by his own cowardice. Next, he addressed Miss Charlotte Ashford. The day of reckoning arrives. A young woman appears at Whitmore Manor. Her name is Miss Caroline Ashford. She is Sir Reginald's daughter. She is also the sister of Miss Charlotte Ashford, though Miss Charlotte does not know this. Until the moment of revelation, he could see Charlotte trembling, see the comprehension and dread in her eyes. Miss Charlotte has worked for Sir Reginald for 7 years. Poirot continued. She has never known that he was her father. She has never understood that her mother was the woman he abandoned. She has lived in proximity to him without understanding the connection, the shared blood, the unacknowledged relationship. He moved toward the center of the room. That evening, Poirot said, there is dinner. Sir Reginald excuses himself. He goes to his study, or so everyone believes. But actually, he goes to his bedroom. He is disturbed. He is anxious about the coming confrontation with his daughter. He takes something to calm his nerves. A drink, perhaps. A medication prescribed by Dr. Melville. At this, Dr. Melville's face went pale. The doctor had warned him about the combination of alcohol and certain medications, Poirot said. But Sir Reginald was not a man who heeded warnings. He was not a man who accepted responsibility for the consequences of his own actions. Poirot paused for effect. At approximately 9 o'clock in the evening, he said, Miss Caroline Ashford goes to her father's bedroom. She has been informed, I believe, by Miss Charlotte of where he would be. She knocks. She enters, and she finds a man who is disturbed, agitated, defensive. A man who does not greet her with warmth or love, or the acceptance that a father should offer a daughter. Instead, he attempts to minimize her, to diminish her significance, to push her away. The room was absolutely silent. There is an argument, Poirot continued, an argument born of 30 years of rejection, of abandonment, of the kind of fundamental pain that can only exist between family members. And in the midst of this argument, Sir Reginald says something particularly cruel. Something that breaks whatever fragile control Miss Caroline has been maintaining. He looked directly at Caroline, whose face was now wet with tears. What did he say? Poirot asked softly. The exact words that drove you to such violence? Caroline could not speak, but Charlotte answered for her, her voice breaking. He said she was a mistake. He said her mother was a mistake. He said he wished she had never been born. He said he would pay her money to go away and never contact him again. He said it as though she were a beggar, as though she were some shameful burden that could be disposed of through the proper application of wealth. Poirot nodded, and at that moment, he said, Miss Caroline saw clearly what her sister would discover only later, that this man did not deserve to be her father, that he was fundamentally broken, fundamentally incapable of love or honor or basic human decency. And in a moment of rage and despair, she acted. There was a letter opener on his desk, a beautiful thing of silver and brass. She took it, and in a moment of absolute fury, She drove it into his throat. The room erupted into gasps and shocked whispers. Death came quickly, Poirot said calmly. The blade severed the carotid artery. Sir Reginald bled out rapidly. He was dead within minutes, and Miss Caroline, devastated by what she had done, sat beside the body of the man who was supposed to be her father, and wept. He allowed this image to settle in the minds of his audience. But then, Poirot continued, something remarkable occurred. Miss Charlotte found her sister. She discovered what had happened, and instead of going directly to the authorities, instead of reporting the crime, she made a choice. He turned to address Charlotte directly. You decided to protect your sister. You realized that Miss Caroline had acted out of desperation, out of the fundamental wound of rejection. You realized that the man who had caused this wound deserved, in some sense, to have his identity erased, and so you removed his head. Charlotte did not deny it. You took the body, Poirot said, and you severed the head yourself. A terrible act, requiring terrible strength of will and terrible strength of body. You wrapped it carefully. You concealed it in the chimney space. And then you created the false discovery. You invited Mrs. Good to witness the body, and you allowed her to assume that she had made the discovery herself. He turned to address Mrs. Good. The thread from your dressing gown was not accidental, he said to her. Miss Charlotte deliberately tore a piece of your garment on the fireplace grate. She arranged for it to appear that you had been present in the room, that you had been moving hurriedly through the space. This was misdirection. This was an attempt to protect both herself and her sister. Poirot returned to his seat at the head of the table. For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire in the great fireplace provided the only sound, the crackling of flames consuming wood, consuming time, consuming the evidence of what had transpired. I have now solved the crime, Poirot announced. I have identified the murderer and identified those who have conspired to conceal the truth. I could arrest Miss Caroline Ashford. I could charge her with murder. I could ensure that she stands trial, that she faces conviction, that she serves her sentence in prison. He allowed another pause. But I will not do this thing, he continued. Instead, I will report to the authorities that Sir Reginald Whitmore died by accident, that he was combining alcohol with medications contrary to medical advice, and that this combination caused a cardiac event, that he fell, struck his head, and died from complications resulting from the injury. The head will be recovered from the chimney and buried with the body. A death certificate will be issued, and this matter will be considered closed. But sir, Hastings began to protest. Poirot raised a hand to silence him. You will not understand my decision, Captain, he said, and I do not require your understanding, but I will explain my reasoning. For truth is not always the same as justice. A crime has been committed, yes, but a greater crime preceded it, a crime of abandonment, of betrayal, of the fundamental failure of a man to accept responsibility for his own actions and their consequences. He rose to his feet and moved toward the window, gazing out at the snow-covered moors beyond. The law exists to protect society, he said, but sometimes the law serves not justice, but merely the comfortable illusions that society uses to protect itself from uncomfortable truths. Miss Caroline Ashford acted out of desperation and pain. She did something terrible, but she also did something human. She responded to rejection with violence. This is not excusable, but neither is it beyond understanding or, perhaps, beyond forgiveness. He turned back to address the room. I have spent my career pursuing truth, Poirot said. I have believed that truth, absolute and uncompromising, is the foundation of justice. But here, at the end of this terrible affair, I have come to understand something more complex. Sometimes truth and justice are not aligned. Sometimes the pursuit of absolute truth creates greater injustice than the acceptance of comfortable fiction. He looked directly at Miss Caroline Ashford. You have suffered a terrible wound, he said to her, a wound that will take years to heal. But perhaps, given the chance to live your life outside of prison, outside of the permanent stigma of murder, you might eventually find peace. You might find love. You might find purpose and meaning. This is what I believe is possible for you if you are given that chance. Then he addressed the entire household. What occurred here will remain secret. The truth will die with the knowledge we carry in this room. No one will speak of what really happened. No one will reveal to the authorities anything other than the official story. If anyone betrays this confidence, I will ensure that everything, all the secrets, all the betrayals, all the shame is exposed. Do you understand?" One by one, they nodded or verbally acknowledged their agreement. "Then we are finished," Poirot said. "The investigation is concluded. The crime has been solved, and justice, not legal justice, perhaps, but true justice has been served." Poirot departed Whitmore Manor the following morning. The snow had finally cleared enough for motor travel, though drifts remained piled along the roadsides like monuments to winter's fury. Hastings sat beside him in the motor car as it wound away from the manor, back toward the distant world of civilization and conventional morality. "I still don't understand," Hastings said quietly. "Why did you let her go? Caroline Ashford murdered a man. By any standard of law, by any definition of justice, she should have stood trial." Poirot did not answer immediately. He gazed out the window at the landscape gradually transforming from harsh winter back into something approaching normalcy. The sky remained gray, but it was the gray of ordinary winter rather than the oppressive lead-colored dome that had hung over the manor. "You know the legend," Poirot said finally, "of King Solomon? How two women came before him claiming to be the mother of a single child. How he proposed cutting the child in half, giving each woman a portion." "Yes," Hastings said. "He was testing them to determine who truly loved the child." "Precisely," Poirot said. "The true mother was revealed by her willingness to give up her claim, rather than see the child destroyed." Justice, in that moment, was not about determining who had rights or who should be punished. It was about revealing the nature of love and sacrifice. He turned to face Hastings directly. "In the matter of Whitmore Manor," Poirot continued, "we have a similar situation, though inverted. We have not a question of who deserves a child, but of who deserves punishment. And in determining the answer, I was forced to confront a truth that the little gray cells had been avoiding for many years." "What truth?" Hastings asked. "That justice is not always served by the pursuit of truth," Poirot said. "That sometimes the greater sin is in the relentless exposure of all secrets, in the absolute insistence that every crime must be punished, every deception revealed, every wound reopened in the name of legality." He settled back in his seat, his fingers steepled before him. "Sir Reginald Whitmore was a man who destroyed lives," Poirot continued. "He destroyed the life of a woman who loved him. He destroyed the life of a daughter he never acknowledged. He destroyed the emotional well-being of a sister who discovered her own father, only to be complicit in protecting her sister's crime. He destroyed the innocence of a housekeeper who was forced to participate in concealment. His was a lifetime of moral failure, of cowardice, of the kind of casual cruelty that comes from privilege, and the absolute certainty of never facing consequences. Yet Miss Caroline murdered him." Hastings protested. "That doesn't justify," "No," Poirot agreed. "It does not justify her action, but it explains it. It contextualizes it. It allows us to see that her crime was not born of wickedness, but of desperation. She came to her father seeking acknowledgement, seeking love, seeking the most basic recognition of their shared blood. Instead, she was rejected with such absolute coldness that something inside her broke." He paused, allowing the words to settle. "And Miss Charlotte," he continued, "committed a secondary crime. She concealed the murder. She removed evidence. She manipulated the investigation. All of this is technically illegal. All of it would be subject to prosecution. And yet her crime was born not of malice, but of love. She sought to protect her sister. She sought to prevent additional suffering. Is such a crime truly deserving of punishment? The law doesn't make those distinctions," Hastings said. "Precisely my point," Poirot replied. "The law cannot make such distinctions. The law is a blunt instrument. It operates according to rules and precedent and the accumulated wisdom of centuries of jurisprudence. But the human heart operates according to different rules entirely. It operates according to love and loyalty and the primal need to protect those we cherish from harm." He gazed out the window as the motor climbed a rise and the manor disappeared behind them, hidden by distance and terrain. "If I had reported the truth to the authorities," Poirot said, "two women would be imprisoned. Miss Caroline would face a murder charge, potentially capital punishment. Miss Charlotte would face charges of obstruction and concealment. Both would have their lives destroyed. And what would be gained? Satisfaction of the letter of the law, punishment of those who had committed technical crimes. But no true justice would be served. The real crime, Sir Reginald's systematic destruction of human lives, would remain unpunished, because the man himself was dead. Then you're saying, Hastings said slowly, that crime should go unpunished if the criminal has sufficient motivation? No, Poirot agreed. It does not justify her action, but it explains it. It contextualizes it. It allows us to see that her crime was not born of wickedness, but of desperation. She came to her father seeking acknowledgement, seeking love, seeking the most basic recognition of their shared blood. Instead, she was rejected with such absolute coldness that something inside her broke. He paused, allowing the words to settle, and Miss Charlotte, he continued, committed a secondary crime. She concealed the murder. She removed evidence. She manipulated the investigation. All of this is technically illegal. All of it would be subject to prosecution. And yet her crime was born not of malice, but of love. She sought to protect her sister. She sought to prevent additional suffering. Is such a crime truly deserving of punishment? The law doesn't make those distinctions, Hastings said. Precisely my point, Poirot replied. The law cannot make such distinctions. The law is a blunt instrument. It operates according to rules and precedent and the accumulated wisdom of centuries of jurisprudence. But the human heart operates according to different rules entirely. It operates according to love and loyalty and the primal need to protect those we cherish from harm. He gazed out the window as the motor climbed a rise and the manor disappeared behind them, hidden by distance and terrain. If I had reported the truth to the authorities, Poirot said, 2 women would be imprisoned. Miss Caroline would face a murder charge, potentially capital punishment. Miss Charlotte would face charges of obstruction and concealment. Both would have their lives destroyed. And what would be gained? Satisfaction of the letter of the law, punishment of those who had committed technical crimes. But no true justice would be served. The real crime, Sir Reginald's systematic destruction of human lives, would remain unpunished, because the man himself was dead. Then you're saying, Hastings said slowly, that crime should go unpunished if the criminal has sufficient motivation? No, Poirot said firmly. I am saying that truth and law and justice are not always identical. I am saying that sometimes the pursuit of absolute truth creates more harm than its concealment. I am